Stagger mechanics are a mixed bag. They have to add something. It isn't enough to just add complexity for complexity's sake. What is a stagger mechanic? Well, let me clear something up. I don't necessarily mean a well-timed parry or an attack that renders your enemy open briefly, though those can be involved. When I say stagger mechanic, I'm talking about systems that revolve around some sort of bar or number that when depleted opens your foe up to heavy amounts of damage, such that you might actually prioritize depleting that before just going straight for their health bar. Things like elemental damage are an easy and effective way to force the player to change up their strategies, sure, but it can get tedious really quickly. Switching between 4 different kinds of elemental armor sets is a real drag when you're trying to just get back into the action. Based on my exposure, the internal struggle of having to decide whether it's worth weakening the enemy versus going straight for damage is much more entertaining. And although there are games out there that use elemental attacks in this regard, it far too often dissolves into the same pitfall of having different categories of damage for its own sake. But as stated before, they need a reason to exist, especially in games where there's already so many different meters to keep track of already. A fantastic example of a game that not only does this, but has it naturally fit within other mechanics of its gameplay is Octopath Traveler. Before we continue, I wanted to try something. Go ahead and comment a video game you love with a good stagger system like we've described now before the video is finished, and we'll see if it gets brought up before the end. Thanks so much. Let's continue. Octopath Traveler's stagger system forces you into some very interesting situations. You accumulate boost points each turn during battles. You can stack these when attacking to try and set your opponent's guard points to 0. Upon doing so, they'll break, stunning them and allowing you to deal more damage. This presents you with the interesting conundrum of having to decide whether to stack points just to break their defense, or when to purposefully hoard points to deal a ton of damage at once. Had boost points not been added to the equation, this system would have had a lot less nuance and depth, basically prolonging normal turn-based battles unnecessarily. I get that people love their Dragon Quests and their more traditional turn-based RPGs, but for a lot of us we need a little bit more when it comes to the genre, and for me, Octo does just that. Nioh 2's take on it is a little bit more freeform. With the incredible customization on offer, you can make builds that exploit or straight up ignore the opponent's stagger bar to your liking. With how spongy some of the enemies feel at times, it can definitely make it an appealing thing to make a set around, though considering finisher moves have their own separate category of damage, it can be fairly redundant to do if you haven't invested anything into it. A cinematic attack that eats up 10% of a health bar is hardly gratifying. So while it does exist, staggers aren't nearly as fundamental to Nioh 2 as it is to Octo. Bosses in particular have a lot of interesting potential for stagger bars. Since naturally those fights are longer than regular battles, having a different variable than health that depletes and resets more quickly over the span of a single lengthy fight can add some much needed variety. A boss that's super spongy and open to giant amounts of damage from a staggered state can be really satisfying, even if a little overdone. As with any concept or mechanic, it's going to be all about how you interweave the idea into your game. Having a factor like stagger gives your RPG more areas for the characters to excel in. Maybe someone's not a giant damage dealer, but their attacks deplete their stagger bar a lot with each blow, so that traditional DPS characters can really get in there and deal the pain. If your RPG or character action game already has enough internal mechanics working together in tandem seamlessly, don't be afraid to exclude staggers altogether. For everyone else though, I personally feel that when done right, ideas that push your players to defeat enemies in unconventional ways have a lot to give for multiple genres out there, and staggers play a huge role in that. So at the end of the day, what does stagger mechanics have to offer games? Well, whether they're turn-based, real-time, or somewhere in between, once again, these mechanics should honestly be treated like any other part of your game. It needs to have a reason to exist and an interesting interaction with other parts of the game. Octopath's BP system once again comes to mind. Stacking multiple attacks into one turn is neat on its own, but it synergizes interestingly with the guard point system since multiple attacks in one turn are really effective against guard points. Add to that the fact that when magic is boosted, it only applies to one giant attack as opposed to melee damage being dealt over multiple blows, and there's even more nuance in choosing which attacks you'll use to break enemies or just deal damage to them. But I'm sure there's other great examples out there. I know a lot of YouTubers say this, but I'm genuinely interested to hear about other games that use mechanics like we've discussed here today. So if you didn't do so earlier, feel free to comment on the video now and say your favorite. I know about Sekiro, of course, and plan on playing it soon. It's a cliche thing to say, but keeping up with the channel by providing a subscription and liking the videos I put out goes a long way in making sure smaller channels like this one actually appear in the YouTube algorithm. So if you liked what you saw today, please do so. Thanks so much, and have a wonderful night. Bye-bye.